And would like to welcome everybody back to Football's Family Podcast. It is a Tuesday afternoon here in Tennessee, and it is already hot, and I'm not looking forward to July and August. That's all I can say about that. But the draft is over, and to my guest, I'm telling you, I'll let him introduce yourself. I picked the first five. After that, I failed at every one of them. So I'm 5 for 32, so I'll take that. Would you like to introduce yourself today?
Sure. Hi, I'm Ken Smoller. I'm the author of Last Comiskey, a new book about Old Comiskey Park, which was the White Sox home from 1910 until 1990. And the book includes over 400 photographs of the old ballpark that I took back when I was a college sophomore in 1990 during the last year of the ballpark.
I remember I was a big baseball fan back in the 80s and 90s, Oakland A's primarily, and then Boston Red Sox. And I remember some of the old pictures from there, especially the baseball cards, the tops, with the brown edges.
Sure.
And I always love the old school hats, especially the White Sox, where they're kind of like two sizes too tall on your head, and they had that old school socks. And Comiskey Park had, like you said, 1910. Golly, I didn't realize it was that old. I knew it had a history. Can you give us a little bit of background of that history?
Sure. It was built in 1910 at a time when a lot of steel and concrete ballparks were going up. It was contemporaries with Ebbets Field, a
Yeah.
little bit newer than the Polo Grounds. Scheid Park, I believe, was a year older. Sportsman Park. Yankee Stadium didn't come around until about 15 years after that, I believe. And it was built originally by Zachary Taylor Davis was the architect, who a lot of people will know as later on being the architect for Weigman Field, which is now known as Wrigley Field. It was he had been a church architect and went on to do a number of ballparks, did a little bit of consulting on Yankee Stadium and some racetracks as well. It was built for the then 10-year-old White Sox, who had been playing at the South Side grounds a few blocks away on 39th and Wentworth. And it was originally just, for the most part, a single deck outfield with a double deck infield. And then it was enlarged in the 20s to take advantage of the fact that big crowds were coming in to see Babe Ruth and Jimmy Fox with the Philadelphia Athletics and a few other teams. But most significantly, it was also expanded to accommodate Chicago Cardinals football at the time. Zachary Taylor Davis was brought back in by Charles Comiskey. And at the time, you were a Sox and a Chicago Cardinals fan or a Bears and a Cubs fan. And those two kind of went hand in hand. And the Chicago Cardinals actually played more games or more seasons at Comiskey Park than any other stadium that they have since played at. Now, of course, they're in Glendale, Arizona. So it lasted for 80 years, did not see a lot of winning baseball, as we all know. They won the championship in 1917, but that was on the road, unfortunately, at the Polo Grounds in New York. And they never won a World Series at Old Comiskey Park. Their World Series came in 2005, 15 years after the park was demolished. So the only team that got to really celebrate a championship that was a Chicago team was the Chicago Cardinals. The Negro League Chicago American Giants never won at home. The soccer Chicago Sting never won at home. So the Chicago Cardinals are the sole team to claim that distinction.
That's I never thought of that. 19 Okay, let's go back to 1910 for a little bit.
Sure.
1910 is America is becoming a power, really as a result of Roosevelt's the White Fleet. Speak softly, carry a big stick, that sort of stuff, starting to become a power and starting to become very stationary in the sense that it's not a lot of movement. So people are able to do fun things like baseball. So you build a stadium for that fun thing, which is odd. If unless something is big, you don't build a stadium for it.
Yeah.
1910, Chicago is an up and coming city. It is the hub of a lot of different cattle, pigs. It's a
Yeah.
hub of
Yeah.
that.
It was the meatpacking capital of the world.
Okay. So
Hog Bitcher to the World was the nickname of the city at the time.
I'm
They
sure
had the
it's,
meat packing districts about 20 blocks from where Comiskey was.
I'm sure it smelled ripe.
Absolutely.
And you had a team because again, you know this better than anybody. If the team is successful, they're going to cater to that team to build it what it takes to make money.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
how much did that stadium, do you know off the top of your head, how much did it cost in that
It
day?
was built in relatively cheaply. I know it was less than $1 million at the time, which is of course a very different amount of money then. It was built quickly. It only took about 5 months to build. I think they broke ground in February and it was ready to go in July.
Golly.
It was a big departure because at that point, most of the ballparks were built of wood. And if you think back to those days, everyone was smoking cigars or cigarettes, and ballparks were burning down almost every year. So the original ballpark was a relatively simple ballpark, and it actually lasted into the 40s, where the Negro League American Giants played there as well. But the Cubs at the time, and they were barely called the Cubs, they actually were originally called the White Stockings, dated back to the 1880s. They played on the west side of Chicago. And remember that the south side of Chicago had really only recovered just shortly before from the Great Chicago Fire, which was 1871.
Yeah, I was going to bring that up. So you're talking
Yeah.
about what, 40 years since the fire,
Yeah.
and now they're building a stadium, which tells you that the city was
It was
working.
booming. It was
Yeah.
booming because you think about it, it was the hub of industrialization as well as farming taking off in the Midwest. So it was the epicenter of railroad travel. It was before O'Hare became the busiest airport in the world, since replaced by Atlanta, I believe. It was the busiest train station city in the world because you had crops coming to Chicago from throughout the Midwest and then getting processed. The crops were getting processed, the hogs were getting processed, etc., shipped on railroads to the rest of the country in Chicago. So it was a booming city, and they got a do over in 1871. The entire city had really been made of wood. The streets, the sidewalks were made of wood, and they got a do over in 1871, and a tremendous amount of investment flowed into the city of Chicago, culminating in the 1893 Chicago Columbian Exposition, which was a huge World's Fair, which debuted a whole bunch of things. The Ferris wheel, the hot dog bun, that came from there. It was the time in which construction was starting to become neoclassical again. So you started to see with all those buildings at the World's Fair and other World's Fairs at that era, the neoclassical buildings were coming back. And Comiskey Park, to some degree, was an outgrowth of that. The architect built it with arches throughout the park. First, it was in the infield, and then continued on with the outfield when they expanded it. And it was, and I include this in the book, evocative of what the Roman Colosseum looked like. And for anyone who's visited the Roman Colosseum, you'll see arches throughout the entire facade of the stadium that still exists. Stadium, probably a poor term, but I guess it's the original stadium. And it also featured, so those arches were part of the design, as well as a cathedral look, because Zachary Taylor Davis had previously been just doing these cathedrals. So you had a lot of real high end architecture going into something celebrating what was the unequivocal leading sport in the US at the time. And football, professional football was decades off, college
Yeah.
football was king as well. And the only real permanent big stadium before the ballparks were built was Harvard Stadium, which was built in the late 1800s. So it was a real big deal when Comiskey went up. It was the crowning jewel stadium at the time in the city of Chicago. It was built before 2 years, excuse me, 4 years before Wrigley Field. It was built a decade and a few years before Soldier Field, and Chicago Stadium wasn't built till the late 20s. So it was really the stadium for the city of Chicago and a gathering place. For decades, it hosted boxing, roller derby, concerts, wrestling, football, soccer, et cetera, et cetera. The Beatles played there. Michael Jackson played there. Um, it was the biggest city. Even the Cubs played some World Series games when they were in the World Series there because it was a bigger ballpark at the time.
So I'm looking at it right now. Um, it's amazing what you can do on your phone. You can see pictures from it. And I think this one, it says it's from 1959, which it probably isn't because it's color, but they could have colorized.
It's a pennant winning year. And so you had that was the year the Sox lost to the Dodgers in the series. So you probably actually did have some color photography that was coming through then because the big games, the World Series and the All-Star games, that's where the color photography always
Okay,
was.
okay. So I'm looking at this and I see the double decker part that you're talking about. It's almost like the bottom is right underneath the top instead of sloped a little bit. It's like right underneath the top.
Exactly.
Now,
Exactly.
was that a design or was that something like we can't build the slope so people have a better view?
I don't think they had the technology at that time. If you think about ballpark construction or stadium construction, you had the beams, you had the pillars blocking
Yeah,
things.
yeah.
And that really occurred until Dodger Stadium. I can't think of another ballpark that didn't have beams. The County Stadium was built in the
Ebbets
50s.
Ebbets Field had it, didn't
I
it?
think Ebbets Field had the beams as well. And so instead, today, what you have is the beams go underneath the upper deck and they push up the upper deck. And that means that it's scaled back from where the lower deck is.
Yeah,
So what you got with these old ballparks was an upper deck that hung over the field. The upper deck almost was parallel to what the lower deck. I mean, in Tiger Stadium, you actually had an upper deck hanging over the lower deck in the right field, so that pop flies could become home runs if they had that right trajectory at Tiger Stadium, where they caught that lip of the upper deck. But you don't see that today, where you see beams. But instead, what you get is ridiculously tall upper decks further back. They're on top of one, two, three layers of club seats
yeah.
and luxury suites, which you didn't have in those days. So it was a more intimate feel. At that time, the box seats were the creme de la creme. That's where you wanted to be if you were a person who wanted to be seen, be seen. And that was something that was really part of Comiskey. If you look at famous people at Old Comiskey, you'll see Al Capone there. You'll see various celebrities, because Chicago had two teams, had an American and a National then as well, and so all the stars would come in from throughout the country. And Chicago was a major city, already by that point, really only behind New York and Philadelphia and a couple other cities. And it really was the epicenter. And the structure was totally different in those days.
So let's do a little history because
Sure.
that's something that just fascinates me. And what you're talking about is just amazing. 1910, it's built. It's built when America is on the way up. Like I said, you have the hub of everything. You mentioned the hub of everything meeting there, the
Yeah.
railroad cars meeting there, going out west, which that would have been the link up to eventually go out to Los Angeles if it could make it. You would have the north side, south side. When you mentioned Al Capone, he's south side. He's 100%. That's where he is. Um, you're talking about in the 20s when it had the how did Comiskey Park, and if you don't know the answer, that's fine. I'm just uh, we'll move on. How did the Comiskey Park deal with the Great Depression, everything like that? Was it still a booming place during that time? Because that's fascinating to me.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I mean, you got to remember, 1919, they had the team. They had a loaded team. They were primed to be the team for the 20s. So you've got now everyone, the eight men out
Yeah.
happens. You lose all these stars. At the same time, the New York Yankees, who really were an afterthought in the teens, are in their ascendancy. So really, it was a death knell in many ways to the fan base for decades. And you could argue that it maybe took 5 or 6 or 7 decades for them really to come back until the 70s or 80s when they started to draw again. The one thing that helped the White Sox was that they had night baseball. much, much earlier than did the Cubs, of course. The Cubs not getting lights until 8-8-88. Side story, that game was rained out. It was really 8-9-88.
Hmm.
The White Sox put him in very early. I think it was 1939, which was 2 years after the Reds, who were the first team to have night games. So at the time, that was one thing saving the White Sox in terms of attendance. They could draw the working class folks who could not go during the daytime, and they could come at night and see ball games. And attendance for that reason did better. There were years and decades that the White Sox drew better than the Cubs. But by the late 60s, that wasn't the case. The White Sox really struggled. They were close to moving to Seattle.
I didn't
After
know
the
that.
Seattle Pilots moved to Milwaukee, Seattle was promised to get a new team. They were talking at that point about building the Kingdom, and there was an ownership group in place that had wanted to move the White Sox to Seattle. And lucky for Chicagoans, Bill Veeck, legendary owner who had previously owned the team in the 50s, late 50s, early 60s, including the pennant year in 59, came back and coddled together with glue and paste, enough investors to buy the team. And that was in 1975. Did some interesting things, brought AstroTurf to the infield. The grass remained in the outfield, but if you look at photos for about 3 years from Comiskey in the early 70s, you'll see this really surreal look with a turf infield. They still had the regular dirt, so they didn't have the cutouts like what you would see at all
Oh
the
my
cookie
goodness.
cutters. But that
I
was to
guess
save some money and be a little bit progressive and adventurous at the time. Of course, Bill Veeck is best known by White Sox fans as the one who brought in the exploding scoreboard in 1960. But he really didn't have the money to keep the White Sox really in a position where they could upgrade Comiskey Park and do something beyond just slap up white paint on the exterior facade and do a few things to kind of keep it flowing until the Jerry Reinsdorf group, along with Eddie Einhorn, bought the team in 1981, which is a mixed bag for White Sox fans because he brought in money and a lot of credibility to the team that lacked it. Brought in players such as Greg the Bull Lazinski, Carlton Fisk, whole bunch of others that were, the first time that the Sox really spent money on free agents. But the downside was that Jerry Reinsdorf really loved Royal Stadium, which was the gold standard baseball only ballpark at the time. And he really wanted to build something like Royal Stadium. And if you look at the design of New Comiskey and you squint, it looks a lot like what Kauffman Field, then known as Royal Stadium, looked like in the 80s. The other unfortunate part is that he built it a year before Camden Yards.
oh
And HOK, which is now known as Populous, was the ballpark and stadium architect. And I've heard and read stories that they brought similar designs for Camden Yards to Jerry's attention, but that the real push was to do something a little bit more analogous to Royal Stadium. Interestingly, Larry Lucchino, the recently passed Larry Lucchino, who was behind the ballpark project in Baltimore, along with Janet Marie Smith, a young architect at the time, who went on to do just amazing things in baseball park architecture. They got a model from HOK for Camden Yards that looked very similar to what New Comiskey Park was. And I did an interview with them a few years ago, and Larry describes having physically, literally taken apart the model with his hands and reconfigured it because he didn't want to build something that was like New Comiskey Park. So that's sort of the evolution of what happened. And we all know what happened after 1992,
yeah.
retro park after retro park. And now in 2024, the White Sox and Jerry Reinsdorf in his last in his older years is looking to build a ballpark in the South Loop, just south of Sears Tower, which many White Sox fans look at these new drawings, and I encourage listeners to Google the South Loop White Sox ballpark, are drooling over. They look great. They would have Sears Tower hovering over it that would make the PNC Park skyline views almost look, basic in comparison. Just amazing views right on the river where folks could come from hotels or downtown offices and take a riverboat to the new ballpark, right by the subway for Chicago. It would be a tremendous ballpark and would correct a lot of the errors that were embedded in the 1991 new Comiskey design.
The only two things real quick here. So apparently, see if I got this right. Night games really saved the
I
White
think
Sox.
so. Yeah, I don't think they would have survived otherwise.
So you're looking during the Dust Bowl, which is not Chicago, but close to it, and the great. And you know what's even better about what you said, Mr. Ken, is that the night games also helped the morale of the people who are working in the factories at that time during World War II. That
Yeah, yeah.
that right there just is amazing to me.
Well, if you look at the famous letter from FDR, which I know the Hall of Fame
Yeah.
has a big exhibit about, FDR encouraged the commissioner at the time to keep baseball going for morale reasons. And night baseball, of course, was where you could actually get the people from the factories to go to games and be able to blow off some steam and get some distraction from the depression, from the war. And this is, leading into the economic boom of the late 50s. And so it really did probably save the White Sox in having two leagues still in that city when a lot of other cities that had two leagues, the second team was moving. You had the Boston Braves
Mhm.
moving to Milwaukee. You had the Browns moving to, I believe it was Baltimore. Um, Philadelphia, the Athletics went all over the place, first to Kansas City and then to Oakland.
Yeah.
So there were two, that's when baseball opened up on the West Coast. And then, of course, the Dodgers moved along with the Giants in 19, I believe it was 57 or 58, moved west. So at that time, the fact that the city of Chicago kept two teams is really a feather in the city's cap. And to this day is something that baseball fans are really blessed with. Before interleague baseball, you had a chance as a Chicago baseball fan to see all the players come through, as you did in New York and a few other cities.
Now, where are you right now?
I'm based in Boston, actually 2 miles away from Fenway Park in
Okay, so you're
Brookline.
so you're like your passion is not where you are. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, which is fine, which is
Well,
fine. I
we'll get to
respect
that.
that.
We'll get. I grew up in suburban Chicago, but I've lived here now half my life.
Okay, okay. Two things. Like I said, number one, here in Tennessee, I'm just about an hour away from Nashville. They have finalized a $2 billion stadium for my Titans.
Yeah.
$2 billion. Long gone are the ideas of public funding stadiums. They're just not economic or anything like that. You do not make the money back.
Yeah.
It doesn't, they said it causes investments to be brought in. Um, it doesn't, it actually moves money from one place to another. It doesn't cause investments to come in.
Hmm.
How is Chicago going to fund that? Do
It's
you know?
interesting. It's interesting. There's a lot going on Chicago stadium wise right now.
Yeah, for
You
the
have
Bears. Yeah.
The Bears flirting with the town I grew up in, Arlington Heights, which is 35 miles northwest of the city. They bought the old Arlington racetrack, tore it down, had planned on moving to the northwest suburbs, and then found out that the county was going to tax them at a much higher rate. So now they want to instead build theoretically a beautiful dome right south of Soldier Field. At the same time, you have the White Sox looking to move. Then you throw in the soccer teams the Chicago Fire would like to move. So here's something that Chicago has no appetite for, and that's public funding. New Comiskey Park from 1991 was completely publicly funded, and Soldier Field essentially was publicly funded. It's owned by the park district. So what's going to be different this time, I think, and I'm hoping, is that there are major real estate developers behind this South Loop project, and it's not just a ballpark. They're looking to build housing, retail, office, museums, all kinds of new development, of which the ballpark will just be one of the puzzle pieces. So I think because of that, there might be a little bit more of an impetus to get this project done. And Jerry Reinsdorf just announced publicly last week that he will throw in money of his own towards this project. It'll be interesting to see how it gets funded. The difference between baseball and football is I think a lot of these NFL stadiums are getting funded because Goodell is promising Super Bowls to whatever new city builds a stadium.
Yep.
And sure enough, if you look back, he has fulfilled that promise, and every new stadium in the last 15 to 20 years has gotten a Super Bowl within its first decade. You can't do that for baseball. An all-star game only brings in so much money. But I think in this case, and what you're seeing, such as in Cobb County with Atlanta, is a ballpark being part of an entire development. I'm a real estate lawyer by trade, and that is my day job. And one of the things that I've seen in my entire career is the proliferation of mixed use development because it's a hedge against economic downturn. If you got a decline in hotels, maybe apartments are doing better. If you have decline in retail, maybe restaurant or office is doing better. So all the projects now seem to get developed, funded as mixed use projects. And this would be another one that's essentially a mixed use project, of which the ballpark obviously will play a key and sexy part, as much as the White Sox can be viewed as a sexy part. And I think for that reason, there's some feasibility to it happening. I don't know how the Bears are going to squeeze out the $5.5 billion they're looking to get to build something analogous to SoFi Stadium or Reliance Stadium. I do not see it how it happens. The Chicago Bears are owned by a family that's main investment is the Bears.
Yeah. Yeah.
And almost every other owner has an owner that's got other businesses feeding that passion project of the
if I remember correctly, the Hallis family were basically given the Bears back in with George Hallis back several in the 20s, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, 1920, 21.
Yeah.
Really for about $1,000, $2,000. This is a great book by Rich Cohn that I read a couple of years ago about that. I'm looking for the name of it on my shelf. About the sort of beginning of the NFL and the Bears. And they had no money, really. He was able to coddle it together and did kind of what Bill Veeck did and got together enough investment and moved the team, bought it from the Staley Company, which is still there. The Staley factory, it was a factory team. And, all the other factory teams have disappeared for the most part, with the exception of the Green Bay Packers.
Mm-hmm.
And the Bears moved to Chicago. They kept the name Staley for 1 year. They were the Decatur Staleys, then the Chicago Staleys. And then to build off the Chicago Cubs name, they decided to become the Bears since they were playing in Wrigley Field. And that is really the Bears, or the Hallis family's main economic driver is the Bears. So you don't have like what the Kroenke family had with other money. They had just bottomless pit of money to buy multiple sports teams and build this palace in Inglewood, California, where you don't have the money that the Davis family had to build what they did in Vegas. Plus, you had other economic drivers. So Reinsdorf, although he's a real estate guy originally, and he owns, of course, the Bulls, he is not inclined to throw a lot of his money into the ballpark, but maybe that's different. Maybe that's different because I think there will be a decent return on investment in the entire project. The Related Company, which is a huge developer, multinational developers behind this project. And I'm really hoping that they get everyone together on the financing to fund this thing, because I think it would be very special. I know that your folks down the street in Nashville are hoping they don't, because then they get a ready-made team to become the Nashville White Sox.
Oh, no. I think it's going to be the Tampa Bay team.
Well, I think that would be good, and that would make sense and come full circle, because if you recall, in 1987, the White Sox were the Florida White Sox for a couple of days. They were going to move into the same stadium that now is home to the Rays. The shirts were printed, the press conferences were held, and it was only through the miraculous arm twisting and some clock stoppage at the state capitol but arm twisting by Governor Jim Thompson, who's passed away, I think about a decade ago, that they got funding in place to build the ballpark. And other than that, it was going to be the Florida White Sox, and I'm hoping they don't become the Nashville White Sox. I hope it's the
Uh,
Nashville Rays.
no, it would be the Nashville Stars. And I
Yeah,
still don't know how Nashville can support. We're a big city, but compared to Chicago, we're nothing. Chicago's
yeah. I don't
humongous.
know. Listen, Nashville's got a heck of a minor league ballpark.
Oh,
You know,
yeah.
the Sounds ballpark is one of the best ever.
I grew up going to Greer Stadium, which was a piece of junk when I was growing
Yeah,
up.
I was there. I was there. It was a bit chunky.
Well, yeah, well, I didn't even think the White Sox were the affiliate of, or the Sounds were the
They
affiliate of the White
they
Sox for a
were for a
while.
while. They were
Yeah, I
at
remember their
least for
Oakland
I think
A's.
about 10 years.
The Oakland A's was really cool because Ozzie Canseco came down. I thought, yeah, that's the closest I'm going to get to Jose, which is okay. Uh, then they moved over to downtown Nashville to the new one. That got hit by a tornado within a year. I remember
I did
going up
not
there and
know
seeing
that.
that. Yeah,
I did not know that.
it's a beautiful stadium, but it got wiped out. But you have in Chicago, and I've got just a few more minutes. And again, this has
Sure.
been fun. Thank you for the history part. I've
My
enjoyed it.
pleasure.
You have the Bears, you have Chicago, the Blackhawks, you have the White Sox and the Cubs, you have the Fire. What other teams do you have in
You
Chicago?
have well, we got the Bulls.
The Bulls. That's
You
what you
now
have.
have the Chicago Sky, the WNB team,
Okay.
which
Okay.
now that they got Angel Reese, they are selling season tickets left and right. And then you have the Red Stars, NWSL women's soccer team. So, to close the loop, the discussion is the Fire would take over a reconfigured new Comiskey Park, downsized for soccer. It would be a fantastic location for a soccer team.
I mean, it wouldn't cost anything.
Not much,
No.
not much. And they've got the parking there. They've got ample parking. They've got the L there. And you don't have the same need for like bars and restaurants and sort of foot traffic for soccer that you do for baseball. So I think it's a win-win situation. The Fire would get the proper stadium for themselves, and hopefully the NWSL Red Sky would go there as well. The Sox would move north. They'd still be in the South Side, nominally. They haven't had a lot of success at the corner of 35th and Shields for the last 124 years, or 114 years, I should say. So let's go a few miles north. You know, see if the luck changes. So yeah, there are a lot of good things that can happen, but politics are what they are in Chicago, and resources are limited.
You have two teams looking to move. Of course, the Bulls, I remember the Bulls growing up. The Bulls were the biggest thing. I grew up a Celtics and then Lakers fan. And when the Bulls came, of course, everybody wanted to be like Mike. I get that part. They're not the same thing that they used to be. They're not.
No, definitely not.
They're not.
They never could be.
No, no. I think the last one I really followed before I kind of went straight football was Derrick Rose, and I think he was hurt a lot.
Yeah, I think it was 12 years ago. The other day was actually the anniversary where he got hurt, and that was the death knell for. I mean, listen, people pay attention to the Bulls,
They do.
but it's not. It's a Bears town and a Cubs town. It's a baseball town because you've got both, but the Bears have both the Cubs and the Sox fans. So you would have the Bears leading off the news for years. Anything involving drama with the Bears would lead off the local news.
Well, it's an institution. At 86 Bears really made that true.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it was before that, but the 86. I mean, listen, every single living member of the 86 team still can do business off of their name, whether they just had one play in that Super Bowl 20. It is still a Bears town, and that's why they are just drooling over that draft last week.
Oh gosh. I wait, I mean, we just have a couple more minutes. The Bears knocked it out of the park. They only had 4 picks, but the first two did it.
Yeah,
First two
it
did it.
is just amazing what is done to the psyche of that town,
And
just
I,
waiting for a quarterback.
and I tell you, it's not Caleb Williams to me was not the best pick that they had. It was their wide receiver they picked up.
Yeah, Yeah,
Caleb
yeah,
Williams is going
it's
to be. I'm not knocking Caleb Williams. I'm just saying that
yeah,
that his name is Rome. I can't even pronounce his last name. Dume.
yeah. I think you got it right.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
he is just embracing. Those two came hand in hand. They wanted to play together. They're going to be
He
electric.
he embarrasses people. Their ankles are broken and his hands are just amazing. Caleb Williams, I watched him play some in college because we don't get a lot of USC games out here. Good gracious, those two are going to be 20 years,
It's
10 years.
exciting. It's exciting. Knock wood that they stay healthy, but it's exciting. But you know what? It's getting to be a long time since '86. I mean, I can still cite the Super Bowl shuffle by heart, I think, but it's getting to be a long time since those days.
And it's about time that Devin Hester made it to the Hall of Fame.
Oh, I could not agree more.
Golly,
Most exciting bear in my lifetime.
it's funny. Uh, and before we leave, I want you to tell us where we can get your book. But
Yeah, sure.
Derek, excuse me, Devin Hester makes it to the Hall of Fame. My favorite band of all time, Dave Matthews Band, makes it to the Hall of Fame. They have a tie-in with Chicago too that I don't know if I want to mention over
An
this. And you know
infamous
that
one.
one. You
An
know that one.
infamous.
Uh, do not dump your waste in the river ever.
Yeah, yeah. They're allowing swimming. They're just declaring the river clean enough to swim
I'm
now.
sorry.
And all the
No.
jokes are about the Dave Matthews Band.
No, I mean, isn't it from the movie The Fugitive that says if they can
Yeah,
die
yeah.
green one day, they can die blue the rest?
Yeah, to my disgust, they died at Cubby Blue after they won the championship in 2016. That was a sad day for White Sox. But to mention to make sure we wrap on this, the book is available at lastcomiskeybook.com. Last Comiskey Book, or I'm at stadiumvagabond.com, which is on social media and my sports travel website.
Okay.
I write and take photographs about sports travel all throughout the world. I've been to 2,300 stadiums worldwide.
Oh, just a
Um,
couple.
this is just my favorite one. I've been to about 600 ballparks. A lot of them in Tennessee as well. I've traveled all over Tennessee to see the ballparks. There's a lot of great ones in that state. But I write about all kinds of different sports, and like to share those photos with everyone. But
Well, I tell you
this is where
what,
I started.
it's about to kick me off here. Please send me that information. I will put it on the show notes. And as long as you own the license, email me the pictures and I will gladly put them on my Twitter and Facebook page.
Absolutely, I'll send you some of the photos that we've got out there, and please share them widely with folks. This is just a way to kind of for baseball fans, football fans, or just ballpark fans to get a trip back down memory lane and see some time travel.
Thank you, Mr. Ken, and thank y'all for listening to Football's Family.